Hi everyone, my name's Peter Bush. I'm the principal of Kalianna Special School, and I'm here today with Professor Pam Snow, and Pam is a Professor of Cognitive Psychology at La Trobe University in Bendigo. And we have a great partnership with La Trobe University which commenced 3 years ago, and the basis of that partnership is for our school in now 7 years' time to have everything that happens at the school totally research based. And Pam has a wealth of knowledge from her speech pathology background and expertise, and is an international keynote speaker at conferences. And we thought we'd bring Pam along today to ask her a few questions to help you understand how we teach reading and English, our English program at Kalianna. So Pam, tell us the basic question that everyone wants to know: how do teachers teach reading at Kalianna?
Well, I think what's been happening here over recent years, Peter, is something of a revolution, really. There's been a really deep dive into what the reading process is, a big rethink about what the reading process is. And that has led to a rethink about the process of teaching reading. And we can see in this beautiful chart behind us, which represents the famous reading rope that was published by Hollis Scarborough back in 2001, 2002. And Hollis Scarborough drew on the simple view of reading, which reminds us that when we read, we've got to be doing two things. We've got to be getting the words off the page, so we've got to understand the writing system that we're working with, and then we have to understand what we're reading. Now, it is theoretically possible to get the words off the page, but to not understand what you're reading. It's not possible to understand the words on the page if you can't get them off the page. So the approach to reading that is being followed now at Kalianna very much privileges this scientific model that the reading process has to involve teaching students how to get the words off the page, if you like, how to decode text, because writing is a code. But then we're also focusing on all the complexities and intricacies of language comprehension. So understanding vocabulary, having the background knowledge that you need to bring to text, understanding that often writers don't say things literally, they say things metaphorically, and we as readers have to draw inferences about those things. So the approach is explicitly and systematically making sure that no students are being left behind in learning these skills.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we as a staff have begun to realise. The task of reading is about breaking a code. And we understand that, and understand that you don't get the code by the way that we learn to speak.
That's right.
Just by being immersed in books around the home or around the school. It's actually a code. You need to learn the sequence and what the code is, so you can learn to, as you say, to get the words off the page and understand what is being read.
And an important part of that is the idea that we humans have evolved for oral language. You know, we've been doing this for a very long time. Our brains have got a large part of its real estate devoted to language, because language is so important for us as humans. So as some researchers have said, we have a language brain, but we don't have a reading brain. We have to acquire a reading brain through the way that we're explicitly taught, because oral language is something that is biologically natural for us to do. Reading, writing and spelling are biologically unnatural, in the same way that algebra is not a natural thing for us to do. We've got to be taught it.
And I think that was one of the other things, is that, as you said, spoken language has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years,
Yeah.
and the written language has only been around
for about 5,000, we think. So it's a blink in evolutionary terms.
So
it's
that's why
just
it's so
a blink.
hard.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard for our kids that and your children with the intellectual disability, why it's even more important that we teach reading really explicitly.
Absolutely.
And
repeating. Not leave it to chance.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Pam, a lot of parents ask me about how they should teach their children to read at home.
Yep.
Do you want to help us with that question?
Well, that's where we're really looking for a partnership between the school and home. And the answer to that question is going to depend, of course, to some extent on where a student is up to with the reading process. So if we go back to the reading rope, some students are still at the process, the essential process of cracking the code.
Yeah,
which is the top part of the reading rope. And any parents who are interested can Google Scarborough's reading rope and you'll find a lot of information about it on the internet. It's a very well respected, useful framework for teachers and parents, I think. So what we want students to do in the early stages is to understand that these squiggles on the page are actually a systematic code. They're not random squiggles, they actually are representing what's happening in the speech system. Now in English we've got a bit of a problem, people, because English has been a bowerbird historically and it's pinched words from lots and lots of different languages. I read something the other day where we often talk about loan words in English, and I read something the other day where someone said English didn't so much borrow words from other languages as chase other languages down dark alleys and rifle through their pockets and steal their loose words. And it's so true. Yeah. So that makes our language very rich, but it also means that we've got spelling patterns that come from many different sources. So we've got spelling patterns from ancient Germanic languages, from Scandinavian languages, from Latin, from Greek, more recently from Hindu and Urdu and Arabic. So we've got this real potpourri from a spelling perspective. And sometimes people think that spelling's the problem in English. Probably really pronunciation is the problem, because spelling has stayed relatively stable, but pronunciation has shifted. So if you take a word like night, K-N-I-G-H-T, originally all of the sounds that are represented in writing were pronounced knicht, because it's a Germanic word. So the spelling stayed the same, but the pronunciation has shifted. So in the early stages, going back to your question about how parents support their children, when they're learning the code, that's the skill that we want them to focus on. Like when children are learning to ride a bike, we're just focusing on staying on the bike. We're not going on a lovely Sunday afternoon bike ride to start off with. We're just focusing on what happens when you turn the handlebars. The training wheels are there to support. There's those basic skills to be learnt in decoding, which we want children over time to become more automatic with, because we want to take that part out of the equation so that later on they can read texts and get to the meaning. But you can't get to the meaning if you can't decode. So what we're wanting parents to be doing is supporting their children at whatever stage they're at with the kinds of readers that they're bringing home and giving them opportunities to practice reading those. But importantly, we also want parents to be reading other books to children. So there's a big difference here between what we ask children to read for themselves and what we read to children. So the stuff over here that we read to children can be quite complex and elaborate, and it should be complex and elaborate, should take their minds into all kinds of other realms and worlds of imagination and general knowledge and vocabulary, but we shouldn't be asking children to do things that we haven't taught them to do in the reading space, because that's going to make them frustrated and make them
Absolutely.
think, this is just too hard, I can't
Yeah.
do this. And if you're not a reader, you can't access the curriculum.
Yeah.
And so we need all children to believe that they can become
Mm.
readers, albeit some children are going to need a lot of extra support to get there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I get parents asking me, oh, why is my child having this reader brought home? I want
Yeah.
them to be reading a higher level book. But you've explained it well. The difference is when you, as you said, you can read to your child a level book that is much higher
Absolutely,
standard, but
yeah.
that's why it's important that we send home for you to use for your child to read is a book that they are comfortable and can read fluently and
Yep. And need practice at that
Yeah.
level. Sometimes we can be a bit surprised at just how many repetitions students need at a particular skill level in order to get that wiring in place in the brain to make it automatic. We look at the words on that and ironically can't not read them because it's so automatic for us. So we're trying to get lots and lots of words to that level of automaticity by teaching how the code works, because we know that we want to get past that point and into the meaning of text.
Yeah, very good. Pam, when a child begins school in the prep class, what are the first skills that are being taught around the reading?
Around reading? Well, there are some oral language skills that it's really helpful for us to be assessing as children come into prep and thinking about, because we know that not all children come into prep with necessarily the same level of oral language abilities, so that's the ability to talk and the ability to understand what other people are saying. So we're still continuing to develop oral language skills in the early, right through school, but particularly in the early stages. One important skill that we focus on a lot in prep is phonological awareness, so the ability to hear whether two words rhyme or don't rhyme. Cat and bat, do they rhyme? Cat and mouse, do they rhyme? They might be related words, but they don't rhyme. So we're really wanting children to be focusing on the sounds of words, hearing syllables in words, maybe clapping syllables in words, listening for words that have the same sound at the start, like pit and pop, and versus words that have different sounds at the start, so same and different, so really tuning in. But early on we need to be getting into how those sounds, which we refer to technically as phonemes, map to text, which we refer to as graphemes. So we're going to be working with small groups of individual sounds early on and helping the students see that there's a system here and what we're hearing is connecting to what we're seeing. And we're going to be teaching children how to build little words with a small collection of sounds. We're going to be getting them to practice writing those words. And I really will emphasise for parents actually, Peter, the importance of physically handwriting.
Yes.
That really helps to consolidate in kids' long-term memory the link between a letter name and what it sounds like. So if I'm 5 and I'm physically writing the letter M and I'm saying while I'm painstakingly doing that, that locks that into my long-term memory much better than just hitting the letter M on a keyboard.
Yes.
So we want kids to be
That's one
writing.
of my messages too, is maybe to put the devices down. Not all the time, of course, but sometimes just to do that activity with your children.
Handwriting is incredibly important. And when we're teaching reading in this explicit way at the top part of the reading rope, we're also in a sneaky, advantageous way teaching spelling. So these students are getting a head start because they're learning that particularly in the early stages, obviously it becomes harder as we move into the more complex aspects of the writing code, but it's really helpful for students initially to see that this is a reversible process. So when I read the word hat, I can then write the word hat, and it goes both ways. So we talk about reading being decoding and writing being encoding. And of course we want students to be doing both hand in hand. And students who are learning to read in this very explicit, systematic way typically become better spellers and have fewer spelling problems down the track.
Thanks, Pam. The next question I get asked by a lot of families that have got children in secondary age of our school, and their child still can't read well, and some can't read at all, and they say, oh, well, let's not bother about teaching reading. But as you know, we believe you can teach kids forever, even young adults. So do you want to tell us your opinion on that?
I think we should be doing everything that we can to catch up older struggling readers, whether they're in a specialist school setting or a mainstream school setting, because reading is such a vital life skill. If we want to be part of the social and economic mainstream, we really need to be literate and not just. I'm not a fan of functional literacy, or I'm not a fan of aiming for functional literacy, because I think we aim too low when we do that. There will be some limits on the complexity of the text that some students can read, but 95% plus of percentage of students at a school like Kalianna should be readers. Yes, there will be a spread of abilities in there, but it takes extra time, extra slog and commitment, but we can get improvement really for all students by putting in the extra work. But the work that you're doing in the early years, I think what you're going to see over time is going to reduce the need for interventions at the higher levels.
And the good thing that we've seen last year with our Year 10 cohort is that the teachers there really got on board with our English teaching, and the kids, they were so impressed about levelling up, they would call it, and going up a level. And fantastic. You're right, they had a broad range of reading abilities, but they all were levelling up, and they were really excited about that. And that has definitely proven to our staff that no matter what age a child is at Kalianna, we can improve their reading, which is a big thing. And the thing that special schools used to fall in the trap of years ago, that talking about teaching functional skills, oh well, they get to year 8, they can't read, we better get them ready for work, we better teach them just life skills. No, that's one thing that we've really learned through this and your partnership, is that everyone can learn to read.
Absolutely. And we need to remember too that, the nature of work and the workforce is changing. So, when I left school, there were lots of jobs for what we, used to call unskilled workers, people who hadn't been to university, hadn't done an apprenticeship, didn't have any formal training. But the nature of our workforce is very, very different now. We've got this thing called artificial intelligence, which is kind of closing in around us, and it's taking away a lot of unskilled jobs. And there's going to be fewer jobs for people with low literacy and low numeracy skills. So that's really an important investment that we need to make for our students, to give them the best set of skills that we can, because employers are going to be very fussy. They've always been fussy, but they're going to, people talk about 21st century skills. Well, cooperation and collaboration and creativity were around when the pyramids were built. literacy and numeracy are really important 21st
Yeah.
century skills.
And when you talk about the skills of the future, I was at a restaurant the other day and a waiter actually served me. So even that waiter that was a robot, I should say,
Oh, wow.
served us. So that
There you
was
go.
just showing you that
Yeah.
those skills, artificial intelligence,
That's right.
as scary as that was.
Yeah, wow.
How do you know that there's a lot of talk these days since the review of the program for support for disabilities in schools? There's a lot of talk about dyslexia. How do you know if your child has got dyslexia?
Oh boy, how long have we got, Peter?
Yeah. Or in a nutshell, what, and I know this is a can of worms too, but in a nutshell for our families,
Yep.
what should they, or what is the things that they should look out for if they think they've
Sure. Yeah.
have a diagnosis or go off to their
Yeah.
paediatrician or speech pathologist?
This is a complicated space.
Yes.
Let's start with the word dyslexia to start off with. The dys part, D-Y-S, means problems with. Lexia means words. So we've got a term that means problems with words, and we use it in relation to the written word. So that's really all dyslexia means, problems with words. It's not a term that has an agreed definition, and its definition...
Hence the problem.
Hence the problem. Its definition has shifted and changed. People move the goalposts over time. The definitions have shifted, and in different jurisdictions the definitions change. Personally, and I acknowledge that there's divided opinion about this, I'm not a huge fan of the label dyslexia. My view is that in every school there are going to be students with reading difficulties.
Absolutely.
We need to have good monitoring tools to pick those children up and pick them up early and give them good, robust intervention. We often talk in schools about tier 2, tier 3 interventions, tier 1 being what's happening in the classroom, tier 2 being small groups, tier 1 being one-to-one.
Tier 3, which is
tier
similar
3,
to our tutoring program.
Yes, yeah. Ironically, whether a student gets a diagnosis of dyslexia or not, what they need doesn't actually change. So sometimes people think, oh, my child's been diagnosed as dyslexic, so they need something really special. In fact, they don't. Your parents managed to take you off to an educational and developmental psychologist and pay a couple of $1,000s and have a diagnosis. My parents don't. We've got similar reading levels, but we both need the same thing. That doesn't change.
Yeah, and Pam, I think that's one of my key philosophies here at Kalianna is that yes, you need a label, unfortunately, for NDOS funding and funding
Correct.
to come here. But the way we teach all of our students is through the different strands of the rope. And
that's right. This bottom-up approach
thing.
that doesn't leave students behind because it's robust and thorough and systematic. The other thing for parents to be really alert to, with or without a dyslexia diagnosis, is that there's an awful lot of pseudoscience sharks swimming around in the waters out there. They target parents, they target schools. Not everyone will like me saying this, but things like coloured lenses and coloured overlays do not work. There is no scientific evidence. I mean, think about it. They've been around for 30 years. If they worked, we wouldn't be talking about dyslexia now. Special diets, exercises, brain gym, computer approaches to speeding up information processing and what have you. None of those work. What works is the hard slog of higher doses of explicit teaching over a longer period of time. That's where we see the gains. It's old-fashioned, it doesn't have bells and whistles, but it kicks the stone along the road, and students make progress that way. So
Okay.
parents can spend a lot of money on things that look like they've got bells and whistles attached to them, and they won't give you the returns that you're looking
Yeah.
for.
Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
And don't forget, if you want to find any more information about how we teach English at Kalianna Special School, we're more than happy to share that with you. And even if you wanted to follow Pam on all the social media, she's very active on Twitter.
Mainly Twitter. No, you won't find me anywhere else. I don't
Twitter
do
she's
Facebook.
really good on.
Occasionally
lots of
on
good
some
articles.
Facebook reading groups, but yeah,
Yeah.
Twitter. And Twitter's a great way to access information about
Yeah,
reading.
and your
too.
blog's really good
And
too.
my blog. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
worries. Thank you everyone, and thanks Pam.
Thank you, Peter. It's been lovely to chat.
No worries.